Welcome to People of HTML5. I'm here with Remy Sharp at 4 in the afternoon on a Sunday in sunny England. We both spend time and effort to put clothes on, so I hope you get something good out of this. Remy, you show a lot of passion for JavaScript, and you actually come from a higher level development to JavaScript. Do you think that the new exciting APIs in HTML5 actually make people see JavaScript as a more mature language and to take it more serious than before?
I would actually say I think that the JavaScript libraries that came out like 3 or 4 years ago actually opened people's eyes to how mature JavaScript is. I mean, jQuery is actually a really good example, but it ended up having a lot of people, including jQuery, do a lot of really stupid, simple things, which is the same as the copy and paste libraries. But at the same time, when jQuery really got some legs, Prototype was already there. Dojo was doing a lot of this stuff already long before. And we were starting to see big JavaScript libraries prove to big companies that they could use JavaScript to do really serious stuff. And I think that this is all the APIs having focused on JavaScript. The APIs are using JavaScript as there's no other way of doing it, but the API is really fleshing out what JavaScript can do. Is kind of the second iteration, actually putting a lot of all the really cool stuff inside of the browser in the first place and not having to do it, actually build all the constructs ourselves. So a really simple example is a slider. Because we don't have to do that with JavaScript if we use the native form elements, it means they've taken all the examples that have been taken, for example, the elements that have been built using JavaScript and actually use that as the background for the actual spec. Does that make sense? So I think JavaScript was, in big corporations and big businesses, they were starting to see it, they were starting to take it more seriously actually a few years before HTML5 really has gotten to this point. And I think that now they're already looking at JavaScript that way. I think seeing all the extra APIs that are coming out and things like native video, things like the offline APIs, I think they should see a really big opportunity because they've already invested a little bit into the JavaScript side of things. Can't hear you, Chris. I can't hear you at all. No, you've gone mute. Could you hear me before?
The slider was a really good example because my problem with that one is in a lot of implementations, jQuery plugins, YUI plugins, things like that, have sliders that work but forget keyboard accessibility, accessibility of giving like audio feedback, these kind of things.
Yeah.
Sadly enough, I see this in native implementations now as well. Like Opera's a pop-up calendar, for example, for the date input is not keyboard accessible. Mm-hmm. So what can we do to make browser vendors say like, hey, if we want to have it native, then it should be better than the stuff that we have already out there?
Well, I don't know. I can't say what we could. The big pro for me is that if it ends up in a spec, it means that every browser has the same blueprint to run from. And if they solve the accessibility problem, if the community feeds back and says, this needs to give audio out feedback to the user, this needs to be the video element, for instance. Opera is the only browser that you can actually control it using the keyboard. The other browsers don't have that yet. But there's no reason why they shouldn't. And in fact, it should be in the spec in the first place. So all they need to do is update the spec and tell the browsers to actually, follow this updated piece of the spec. Just like when they add a new attribute like the preload attribute on video, they're all iterating that change into the browsers. If the spec has the accessibility stuff right, then I have the faith that hopefully the browser vendors will follow that. So it's a case of actually getting the spec right, feeding that back to the W3C or the what group or whichever one the browsers are really following closest. That's what I think. And I think the point you raised about kind of YUI, jQuery, Dojo all having a slider. The thing is, they all have different APIs. They all are handled slightly differently. They're all missing one thing from each other, usually. Like one of them had keyboard support, one of them allows you to use page up to kind of skip a bunch of values, for instance. I mean, that's stuff that you could add in, but the point is we want a consistent interface. And when it comes to the actual specifications from the W3C, that's where the consistency comes from and gets built into the browsers. And that's maybe naively, I have faith that the browsers are all looking at these specs now and will actually implement this consistent interface. And things like accessibility, really the point about having an audio feedback when you move the slider, that's a pretty easy thing to raise a bug for. And then they've got the bug there, then they can actually roll it into the spec. And then every browser has that blueprint for doing it right. And it's consistent. I think, I don't know, I think with browsers like IE9 and today, they are all working together to try and make the browsers a better platform for us. It's not the days of IE6, it's not the days of IE4 when, it's just one kind of leading the way and doing it their own way. I think they are trying to work from the spec. And yeah, they're doing, a few of their own things, but that's where innovation comes from as well. So I think we're in a pretty good situation. I'm a bit of a hippie. I kind of expect things to be okay in the end. And maybe it's all terrible and everything is burning down around me, but I have faith in the browsers, Mozilla and Microsoft even, and all those guys. So.
It's quite interesting, especially the preload attribute is it's great for a browser if I define that and it already preloads for me on a desktop, but on a mobile device, for example, on a 3G with a certain amount of data per month, I don't want every video that I randomly go to preload. So a lot of times it's up to the browser vendor to implement it in different environments differently as well. And that brings me to another thing that you said in your interview, that you applauded WebKit, that the annoying thing for you for the video API is that it doesn't allow people to go full screen. Mm-hmm. Now, going full screen is not a matter of beauty, but it's actually a matter of security, because in Flash we stopped going full screen without user interaction because it allowed for phishing. Yep. So now you applauded WebKit that it's fine to go full screen in video again. Isn't that a bit of a slippery slope? Isn't it browser vendors sometimes say, yeah, we know that's a security problem, but unless there is an exploit in the wild, we're not going to fix it. And to me, an exploit in the wild means people have lost their online identity already or lost some money, and our users shouldn't suffer for innovation.
So I agree completely. Thank you. Good night. No, my point about the full screen, there's a clause, not a clause, there's a note in the spec that says browsers should not allow the video to go full screen through. Shouldn't allow the video to go full screen because of these phishing issues. And Flash, like you said, have exactly the same problem, and they solved that, haven't they?
Well, they solved it by not allowing you from the beginning to go full screen, but then only on user interaction, much like starting any Flash movie only by user interaction. And
that's exactly how WebKit have treated it. They've taken that, the same as a pop-up. You can't trigger a pop-up unless the user has clicked to make the pop-up happen. Yeah, it was to block kind of pop-ups and pop-unders and so on. You can only go to full screen in WebKit if the user action instigates the actual action. If you call the go to full screen through JavaScript, it doesn't go to full screen. Has an exception. It's only on click that you can actually fire full screen. And Flash has solved this problem by doing exactly that, only allowing the user to go to full screen if they initiate the action. The HTML5 spec for that particular part of video should just follow Flash's. If Flash have solved it, or the people behind the Flash player have solved it, then we should be at least looking at how they solved it and using that solution. And like I said, WebKit don't allow you to just go to full screen automatically. You have to click on a button, or you have to actually, the user initiates that action. You can't programmatically just fire up into full screen, which is correct. You shouldn't be able to do that. But the spec specifically says you can't go to full screen. And if we can't go to full screen, video is a nice bit of native solution to video, but it's not the solution. It's not when I watch the BBC iPlayer, I put my laptop on my desk and put it full screen and sit back. I'm never going to be able to do that with native video. So
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that The problem with that one was that like it sounded like okay, they solved that problem, and I see a lot of that going on, that people say like, hey, it's innovation, and then we later on think about security. But you made a very good point that Flash has been around for so long and is responsible for a lot of security problems on the web, but they found ways around it. So we should learn from that. And you're one of the few other people, and I keep saying that as well, that HTML5 is not a Flash killer. HTML5 should be the natural evolution of where the solutions that we build with Flash are going. And HTML5.com, for example, right now links to Apple because the owner of HTML5.com says Apple were the only ones that spoke out against Flash, and Flash has to die. And I think it's just a very sad attitude that we have right now. And you listed a few people. Do you think, how can we work around that problem? How can we get the learnings from the Flash community and make HTML5 people use these learnings more rather than trying to replace what has been done before?
I think it's just through the opening up of communities for starters. Like, the web community are very much like, that's the Flash camp, and we're going to throw rocks at them. And the Flash camp are there with their spears, and they're ready to throw back at us. But there are people in those communities that are going, actually, this is stupid. I'm not a Flash developer or a JavaScript developer. I develop for the web. I develop applications, and the delivery system is the web. I don't care if it's Flash or JavaScript or something else. I like building stuff, and I can talk to you guys, and you're not going to rip my head off because I used Flash this day and something else this day and something else this day. It's a case of learning from each other. I said Seb Lee Delisle is one guy who was he's my Flash. To me, he's the Flash guy, but he's not the Flash guy because he does loads of stuff in JavaScript. Mr. Doob is a really good example as well. A lot of his earlier stuff is all Flash ActionScript stuff. And he's doing loads of stuff using the Canvas API and some of the HTML5 technologies or related technologies that are out there. They haven't gone, no, we're just going to do ActionScript. We're not going to bridge out into JavaScript. The web community need to have the same approach. It shouldn't be Flash has to die. It should be Flash is really good at doing this thing, and it should be used for that thing. But we shouldn't use it for whole websites like, Adobe's Forum. That shouldn't be a Flash website. Equally, we shouldn't be trying to... I'd argue that some of the games that are coming out on the iPhone, for instance, that you can get the native, that would suit Flash better than it does trying to kind of, squeeze every single bit of CPU out of like Canvas or SVG or something to get a really fast interactive 3D game, because it's just not going to cut it. Like, Flash is better at that stuff at the moment. And I see a lot of the HTML5 and related specs actually replacing Flash's basically Flash was being used for video. It was being used for custom fonts. It was being used for sockets. It was being used for a bunch of these little pieces of broken technology that we should have had in browsers years and years ago. Or arguably we should have had them in browsers. And now HTML5 and those other specs have come along and gone, okay, so we need sockets. So let's just put it in the browser and get Flash to move on and be working on something much more interesting. It's not... Every single Flash developer I've spoken to, when I've asked them, do you enjoy making a video player? Not one of them has gone, yes, I love it. I want to do more and more and more. So let's just, let's use native video for video and let Flash work on something really amazing. I think we can learn from each other. These guys have been through the same cycle that we're about to go through. And things like if we want to make a really richly interactive game using the Canvas API, it's not really fast yet. And the Flash guys, they've dealt with that kind of problem in the early versions of Flash. They've squeezed those rendering cycles. They've got those optimization tricks, and we can learn from those guys because that's kind of old hat for them. Just like those guys learned from the PC guys that were building demos like the Future Crew demos from kind of, the 90s. So
even further than that, even Commodore 64, Game Boy Color, Amiga, And that brings me to WebGL as well. I mean, a lot of games development that is coming with the newer technologies, or new technologies as Bruce called them, a lot of them are hardcore development. They're really like console development we've done in the past. And I mean, I'm a JavaScript guy, but WebGL does my head in right now. It's going to be a very interesting future in this department.
No, I agree, and I'm kind of worried for my job. I'm not that smart. Like, a lot of what I do is just mashing it together until it looks right, and I just know which bits to mash. That's the trick. WebGL, I have no idea. I'm not that clever, and I'm worried that I'll be, well out of the job, because JavaScript will be so. I mean, JavaScript 2, the Java-like one, that scared me because it just looked too programmery. WebGL, very programmery, if that's a word. I don't think it is, but it should be.
Well,
should be the thing I'm afraid of.
There's always people that have to explain it and speak human as well, so there will always be a job for us as well. You also talked about that you get very excited about serverless applications and basically IndexedDB, WebSQL, offline storage. These are all great things, and I love them as additions to the server client structure that we have. But I, for example, use 3 different computers and a mobile phone. So if we just use client storage, how would you think that?
Yeah, I'm more interested in the challenge of serverless applications, and that's right there. There's the challenge. How do you sync something that has no server? And there's no such thing as a serverless web application, because how the hell did you install it? Like, where did it come from? Well, I mean, yeah, I could write it, but what I'm interested in is removing a lot of the server backend stuff, because what I saw for years and years was basically trying to deliver all of the interactivity from the server to the client, and the HTML was this the very, very final step. Whereas some of the pieces should have been on the client side, and stepping through, this is not a great example, but stepping through a registration form. If there's 3 parts to it, why have all 3 parts on the server side? Now, years ago, we've now solved that with Ajax, and we just deliver a fragment of it, or we just have the whole thing delivered and we use a little bit of JavaScript to kind of, progressively enhance it in one block, and then when you click next, it shows the next block, and so on and so forth. That kind of thing has been solved. And we do use less of the server to do that. But I'm interested in, but it's more of a personal interest. I don't think every application can go this way, but things like JSBin, for me, all of it, bar saving it, works on the client side. Whoa, still there, yeah. All of it, bar the saving, works on the client side. And I know how to get past the saving part as well. But the problem is you can't share it with someone else live. So you still need a server for a little bit of it. But I'm really interested in making web applications work without an internet connection. So using the offline application cache to actually run the entire application. I want to see more mature events for offline and online, because at the moment there are events for it, but they're crap. Basically, you have to go into the browser and go File, Working Offline, tick yes. What we want is when we're sat on that train with a 3G dongle sat in the laptop, when it goes underneath the tunnel, you want an event to say I've gone offline. And when I'm writing my email or when I'm doing my thing, it'll just switch to offline mode, store it in the local cache, and then when it detects that it's gone back online, it'll sync up that change. And you do need servers for stuff like syncing and for profiles or for history of documents. But I think I'm interested in moving a lot of that into the client side and really taking the browser and making it the application environment. And in fact, I want to see more of actual applications that are web browsers that you don't see the web browser part of it. You just see the view. Like, why? Basically it's PhoneGap for the desktop for PC and Mac. That's the kind of thing I want to see. But that's because I'm really curious and excited about that part of the web on a desktop. And I know that personally, I think you can build much better applications using the language that's native to the platform like Objective-C for a Mac, for instance. If you want a really, really good application, use the language that's perfect for the desktop. But there's some things that I see that I could write much faster using web technology, and it's all there for me, just in that little white box that's the browser window. I just need like a headless version of a browser, and I'm happier than a pig in shit, basically.
Well, that ties in again to the security model, though, as well. I mean, JavaScript, I mean, we're trying to do that with strict mode in JavaScript. It's a bit ironic. I mean, you did the same thing that I did. You came from Perl to PHP to JavaScript. And I learned JavaScript because I wanted to write things offline. Because I just could go in the train and write my JavaScript and do functionality in the browser. Nowadays, I find myself, even writing about JavaScript is impossible without having an internet connection because you keep using hosted services. So it's a very interesting interesting thing to tackle is offline applications, and I'm totally agree that we need proper events for tying into it, not just hoping.
Yeah.
Also speed events that tell us, like, instead of just writing our own little system that recognizes how fast the speed is, like for example Philip Tellis had done. This is something a browser should tell me. I'm currently connected with that kind of speed.
Yeah.
It would be great to have those. So when it comes to wrap up a bit, because YouTube has a certain time we can upload, what would you like to see people do more right now when it comes to HTML5 showcases? What ails you about them, and what would you like to see more shown more to the public?
I mean, one thing is the showcases that are out there. They're normally coming from the massive companies like Google or Mozilla, and that's awesome. I think that's great, and we don't want to see less of that, but I want to see more companies, real companies, doing that kind of thing, really using the technology. I look at a lot of websites and try and see what parts of JavaScript they're using and what APIs they're using, and seeing how they're showcasing their technology for some reviews I do. And more often than not, I look at a website and I'm like, brilliant, you've managed to change a class, great. You've hidden a bit of a panel or something. I think that companies want to commit more to the browser, and this whole. I'm still getting people that say, "What about IE6?" Well, look at your users. I mean, that's something I said about in the interview with you. Most of the stuff I'm developing doesn't cater for IE6. It delivers a broken down version, a much more degraded version. Commit to the browser. If you want your game to be really interactive or really fucking good, use the technology that's there in the browser. I want to see, not really very specific, but I want to see people getting their balls out and really going for it, rather than kind of pussyfooting around. The technology is there in the browsers, and the browsers are in a pretty good state. It's not terrible. And if they look at the real usage stats, I'm sure that they will find IE6 doesn't factor at all, because the people using IE6 are in massive corporations that are supposed to be pushing numbers and pressing buttons, not on Facebook, or not playing interactive games, or not sharing design drawings that you can do in the browser with multiple users and real-time sound, or that kind of thing. So, get your balls out, people. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, on that note, I'm very happy that Bruce is not on the same call. And thank you very much. So you heard it from Remy. Just the browsers are there. Use what we give them, and please give feedback to the browser makers as well, because they should not be the ones saying what's secure, what's not secure. We need use cases, and we need real implementations of HTML5 technology. Thanks again, Remy, and hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.